The high-level general debate of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly gathers heads of state and high officials in New York for a third day. In Mexico, a 6.9 magnitude earthquake left 2 victims in the capital of the republic. Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed a prisoner swap with Ukraine. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. Thursday sees the third day of United Nations high-level general debate of the 77th session of its General Assembly. This is the first entirely in-person General Assembly meeting since the start of the pandemic. Heads of state, heads of government, and top diplomats address global conflicts, the economic fallout after COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and the social inequities that minorities still face worldwide.
The financing.
Until we have these double standards where attention is solely focused on one side and not.
The Foreign Minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez, denounced the inequalities afflicting the world worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic.
6.5 million people have died as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Vaccinations to tackle this crisis are inaccessible to billions of people in low-income countries. In 2021, pharmaceutical multinationals earned $850 billion. External debt has been paid several times over, and nevertheless it is growing. Paradoxically, military expenditure at a global level is growing at a dizzying pace, and for the first time now exceeds $2 trillion.
Also, the Cuban diplomat underlined how the U.S. continues to ignore the UN resolution to put an end to the unilateral sanctions and blockade against the Caribbean country.
The US continues to ignore the almost unanimous demand from you to cease its illegal and brutal policy against Cuba. Endeavors are still waged on the part of the US to create material shortages, to sow despair, disenchantment, and to cause damage to the Cuban people. The government of the United States is strengthening pressure on banking institutions, companies and governments throughout the world that are interested in establishing relations with Cuba, and the United States continues to obsessively pursue all sources of foreign exchange coming into the country to bring about the economic collapse.
And Charles Sovereign, the president of the Commonwealth of Dominica, condemned the U.S. unilateral sanctions against Cuba.
The government of Dominica therefore strongly urges the few states who continue to support these sanctions to heed the call of the overwhelming majority of us gathered here and lift this archaic and unfair embargo against Cuba. And let us all support the full integration of the Cuban people into the global financial and trading systems. For decades, Cuba has been training medical doctors, nurses, engineers, and other professionals, as well as providing technical assistance to developing countries as part of its South cooperation. Cuba also offers professional training in various disciplines to thousands of students from all over the developing world.
The president of Guyana, Irfan Ali, stated that the international community is facing several problems, making it difficult to achieve the goals of the 2030 agenda.
It's facing a series of interlocking challenges: a global pandemic, climate challenges, energy and food crisis, and interstate conflicts. As a consequence of the pandemic, approximately 97 million more persons are living on less than $1.90 per day, significantly increasing the global poverty rate and inequalities. The developing world lost revenues and income that were earmarked for the achievement of many sustainable development goals, pushing us further away from our 2030 targets.
The Prime Minister of Lebanon, Najib Mikati, also showed support for Palestine and advocated for its independence.
The injustice against the Palestinian people must be lifted. The sovereign and independent Palestinian state, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital, must be realized, and the relevant international legitimacy resolutions must be implemented, including the decision and resolutions for the return of refugees. In the context of the debate on the Palestine refugees, allow me to emphasize the central role played by UNRWA in serving the goals and purposes of the UN by contributing to mitigating the suffering of the Palestine refugees and helping achieve a measure of regional development and stability.
The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa, Dr. Naledi Pandor, highlighted the importance of multilateralism to solve the global problems and reiterated the role of United Nations and its transformation.
The United Nations must, of course, itself be transformed so that it serves its role cognizant of current global dynamics. It is unacceptable that 77 years after its establishment, 5 nations wield disproportionate decision-making power in the United Nations system as a whole. Transformation of the UN must include more representative, transparent, and accountable organs of global governance. For this body to be effective, the General Assembly must be revitalized, the Security Council must be reformed. We also cannot have a credible organization if it cannot hold persistent transgressors of the Charter to account. Mr. President, we believe we must...
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. We update information from Mexico as the 6.9 magnitude earthquake registered early Thursday left 2 victims in the capital of the republic. The movement, reported at 1:16 local time, 84 kilometers from Cualcomán, caused landslides, mainly in Michoacán, in the west of the country. Civil protection activated all the surveillance and attention protocols in the 113 municipalities, and soldiers of the Mexican Army, together with agents of the Civil Guard, have been deployed on a protective operation. Authorities have confirmed that there is no risk of tsunami. In the first hours, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador himself made a report in communication with the head of government in Mexico City, Claudia Sheinbaum. Also in Mexico, relatives of the 43 missing normalistas in Ayotzinapa protested outside the Israeli embassy, demanding the extradition of Tomás Cerrón, who is accused of obstructing the investigations, among other crimes. The protesters also indicated Tomás Cerrón is accused of torture in the Ayotzinapa case. However, relatives and friends of the normalistas urged the state to apprehend all those responsible, both high officials and security personnel who participated in the reprisals repression. Let's remember that the forced disappearance of the 43 students from Ayotzinapa occurred during a series of protests during the government of Enrique Peña Nieto in the year 2014. In Brazil, the Regional Electoral Court of the Federal District will begin sealing ballot boxes to be used during the presidential elections next October the 2nd. Several authorities, lawyers, and political parties have been summoned to witness the authenticity of the software to be used in the electronic ballot boxes. The event will consist on the installation of the appropriate means and the placement of seals signed by judges, attesting to the integrity of the approximately 577,000 ballot boxes that will be used in the upcoming presidential elections. And the second day of constructive dialogue ended in Switzerland, during which Venezuela defended the report presented to the Human Rights Committee. From Geneva, the Human Rights Committee, formed by 14 countries, recognized the high level of the Venezuelan delegation, composed by authorities of the 5 public powers of the state. The officials presented reports addressing the issue of protection for the immigrants in the South American country and their families, as well as for Venezuelans abroad. In this regard, the committee recognized the policies of the Venezuelan state with respect to human rights since the approval of the 1999 Constitution, as well as expressed the committee's solidarity with the harmful effects of unilateral coercive measures against the Venezuelan people and Venezuelans abroad.
Well, we have had a successful day again here in Geneva, Switzerland, in this constructive dialogue with the Committee for the Protection of All Migrant Workers and members of their families. The high-level delegation of the Venezuelan state, composed by the 5 public authorities of our country, have held a sincere, open dialogue with the committee, giving account of all the policies that our country develops to implement each of the provisions of this international treaty, which we ratified in 2017 and whose full implementation has been assumed by our country.
The Minister of the Social Process of Labor in Venezuela, Francisco Torrealba, stated that the South American nation expressed its truth before the UN Human Rights Committee.
As head of this delegation, I have been able to clearly express before this Committee of the United Nations the truth about Venezuela, what is happening with the crimes committed against Venezuelans who have had to immigrate from our country and their rights are not recognized in those countries where they have had to go to work. What is also happening with the immigrants who by millions live in our country and now also with us Venezuelans, live an illegal and genocidal set of unilateral coercive measures that have been imposed on us.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Russian Ministry of Defense has confirmed on Thursday a prisoner exchange with Ukraine. They assured that it is the result of a difficult process of exchange negotiations. 55 servicemen of the Russian armed forces and the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk were released on Wednesday night. Moscow pointed out that those released were facing a deadly threat during their captivity. On his part, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, informed on Thursday morning that Ukraine also handed over the Ukrainian oppositionist Viktor Medvedchuk, and his advisor, Andrei Yermak, certified the release of 215 Ukrainian servicemen. The operation takes place one day after the Russian president ordered a partial mobilization of troops. And the Bank of Russia proposed that financial institutions and microfinance providers grant monetary support to military reservists. Russian President Vladimir Putin signed on Wednesday a decree for partial mobilization, which will transfer 300,000 military reservists to active service, while the country faces a protracted conflict with Kiev forces. The Russian bank recommended granting moratoriums on loan repayments to those mobilized for military service. The top regulator advised lenders to meet the needs of such borrowers and develop special restructuring programs or adapt existing one. China's military sent naval and air forces to track and monitor U.S. and Canadian warships as they transited the Taiwan Strait. The Navy authorities denounced that this was an act of sensationalism and provocation and condemned this illegal transit through Chinese territorial waters. The ships were identified as the North American destroyer USS Higgins and the Canadian frigate HMCS Vancouver. The institution also warned that the Chinese troops are ready to respond to any provocation and military threat. The authorities of the Asian giant denounced these moves as a serious violation of the One China principle and of the commitments of the U.S. not to support the separatist forces in Taiwan. And the president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, announced on Wednesday early presidential elections for next November 20th. Although the incumbent's first term was due in 2024, elections have been brought forward to October and November this year. According to the constitutional amendments approved last June, after a wave of protests earlier this year, the presidential mandate will be extended to 7 years, but without the possibility for re-election. Tokayev said this will allow us to focus on tackling long-term tasks in the future. The president said that the election campaign will be conducted fairly, openly, and with a broad participation of domestic and international observers. In Philippines, protesters vowed on Wednesday to never forget the human rights abuses under former dictator Ferdinand Marcos, as they held rallies to mark 50 years since his imposition of martial law. There are estimates of thousands of people killed and tens of thousands tortured and imprisoned after Marcos imposed martial law on September 21, 1972, unleashing security forces on rivals, critics, and dissidents. Hundreds of protesters, including human rights activists and Christian groups, held peaceful demonstrations across the capital Manila, carrying banners and signs with slogans reading "Never Again" and images of martial law victims. Half a century after that rule began, more than 11,000 people have been officially recognized as victims of torture, killings, enforced disappearances, and other abuses.
It's important that we don't forget what happened during martial law, because the people who have committed the crimes against the Filipino people have not yet been given justice. The families who have lost their loved ones, who have been disappeared, who have been tortured and killed during martial law, have not yet been given peace, because the Marcoses are, as we can see, back in power and once again plundering the resources of our nation. And we cannot allow this.
And this September 24th, TeleSUR invites you to see a brand new documentary titled Alex Saab, a Kidnapped Diplomat. The audiovisual features testimonies from lawyers, experts, and family members of Alex Saab, including his wife, Camila Fabri. All of them will reveal details never known before about the first kidnapping of a diplomat in the history of the world. It also compiles the actions taken by the U.S. government towards countries and individuals to ambush Saab in Cape Verde. Authorities in the island country imprisoned the Venezuelan high government official without an arrest warrant against him. Don't miss the documentary Alex Saab, a Kidnapped Diplomat, only on TeleSUR. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. And you can also follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.